I was trying to breathe, but it felt like the air wasn't coming in. As I struggled to break free, I saw a figure forming in front of me in the midst of the mist that the wind brought from the sea. It was a woman, but she didn't look normal. Her face was pale, disfigured, with completely black eyes. Today on the channel Echoes of Shadows, you'll discover 3 terrifying stories of adventurers who found the darkest experiences of their lives on the sandy beaches. Leave a comment if you've ever encountered something supernatural. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new real stories. Thank you very much. Story 1. The Presence Beneath the Sand.
My name is John, and this happened 2 years ago at a secluded beach called Widow's Cove on the coast of Maine. I had just moved to a small town nearby, Eastport, looking for peace and quiet. I worked remotely, so the beach was my refuge. I've always liked isolated places, far from crowds, but that night, I learned that being alone doesn't mean being safe. It was a Friday night, early evening, and I decided to visit this remote beach that someone had told me about. They said no one ever went there, and it was perfect for anyone seeking solitude. I arrived around 8 p.m., the sky completely dark, with only the moon lighting the rough sea. All you could hear was the wind and the crashing waves, and at first that was exactly what I wanted. Peace. I parked the car at an isolated spot and followed the path down to the beach. The trail was strange, with twisted trees that looked like they had grown the wrong way. The air felt thick, heavy, but I kept going. When I reached the sand, the tide was high, and not a single soul was in sight. Perfect. I walked for a while, listening to the waves fill the absolute silence. But then suddenly I heard something different, a muffled sound, like someone sobbing. I froze and looked around, but there was no one there. The crying continued, faint, like it was coming from beneath the sand. A chill shot down my spine. But still, I pushed forward, trying to ignore it. That's when things really got strange. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a foul smell filled the air, like something was rotting nearby. And the crying, it got louder. Now it seemed to be right beside me, but when I looked around, there was still no one. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. I kept walking, but then my feet started sinking into the sand, like it was alive, pulling me down. I tried to free myself, but it felt like something had latched onto my ankles. That's when I saw it. Just a few feet away, near the water's edge, there was a figure. It wasn't human. It was tall, thin, with skin as pale as bone, and its eyes were huge, glowing in the dark. It stared at me, unblinking, unmoving. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure started moving toward me, but it didn't walk like we do. It seemed to float, and the sand around it rose up like it was alive. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I thrashed, trying to free myself from the sand. But the more I struggled, the deeper I sank. The figure stopped in front of me, and that's when I saw its face. It had no mouth, just those empty black eyes as dark as the ocean at night. It raised a skeletal hand, and in that instant, I felt something tighten around my throat. I couldn't breathe. The air being ripped from my lungs like an invisible hand was choking me. As I fought to break free, I heard its voice for the first time, but not with my ears. The voice echoed inside my head, cold and sharp. You shouldn't have come here. At that moment, I thought I was going to die. The sand was already up to my chest and the grip on my throat only tightened. But then, out of nowhere, it stopped. The figure stepped back, still staring at me with those dead eyes, and the sand stopped pulling me under. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, unable to believe I was still alive. I managed to get up and run toward the car, not daring to look back. As I reached the trail, the crying started again. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was right beside me, like that thing was running with me. I jumped into the car, started the engine, and sped off as fast as I could. Since that night, I've never gone back to that beach. And now every time I hear the wind howling against my windows at night, I remember that crying, and I feel like somehow that thing is still following me.
Story 2. Whispers in the Sand.
My name is Jake, and this happened last summer at a secluded beach on the Oregon coast called Driftwood Beach. I lived in a small town nearby, Coos Bay, a place full of old legends and strange stories passed down for years. I never believed much in any of that, at least until that day. It was January, peak of summer, and I needed some time alone. I grabbed my car and drove to that beach, far from the tourists and families crowding the more popular spots. Driftwood Beach was forgotten, desolate, and had this eerie atmosphere. The wind was always stronger there, and the sea more violent. It seemed like the perfect place to clear my head. But that day, peace was the last thing I'd find. I got there around 5 p.m., the sun starting to dip, casting this orange glow over the rough waters. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I felt a shiver down my spine, but I brushed it off. It's just the wind, I thought. I walked along the sand, took off my shoes, and let the cold waves wash over my feet. The beach was completely empty, just me and the sound of the crashing waves. But as I walked, I started to hear something else. Footsteps. Footsteps that weren't mine. I stopped for a second, looked behind me, but there was no one. I kept walking, but the footsteps grew louder, quicker, as if someone was following me. I picked up my pace, but so did the footsteps. The air started to feel heavy. I looked around, heart racing, but saw nothing. That's when I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see someone, but there was absolutely nothing. In that moment, my body froze. I couldn't move. It was like something invisible had its grip on me. And then I heard a voice. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't have come here." Those words echoed in my mind, like they were being spoken directly inside my head. Suddenly, I felt a sharp force hit my back, like someone had shoved me hard. I fell face first into the sand. I scrambled to get up, confused. But before I could react, something struck me again, this time in the chest. It was a violent, unseen force. I hit the ground again, and before I could catch my breath, I felt an intense pressure on my chest, as if something heavy was pressing down on me, pinning me to the sand. I struggled to breathe, but it felt like the air was being sucked out of me. As I fought to get up, I saw a figure forming in front of me through the mist that the wind was whipping off the sea. It was a woman, but she didn't look normal. Her face was pale and distorted, her eyes completely black. She stared right at me while the pressure on my chest grew unbearable. I started to scream, panicked, but no sound came out. The woman moved closer, and the air got even thicker. She opened her mouth as if to scream, but no sound came. And then I felt a sharp pain in my arm, like claws digging into my skin. I looked down and saw deep scratches appearing on my arm out of nowhere. My vision started to blur, and I thought it was the end. I didn't know what to do. I just kept thinking about staying alive. In one final effort, I managed to break free and started running, even though my chest was aching and my vision was fading. But as I ran, that voice stayed in my head, louder now, screaming, "You'll come back! You belong here!" I sprinted to my car as fast as I could. When I got in, I locked the doors, my hands shaking, still feeling those invisible claws digging into my skin. I started the engine and drove away, not daring to look back. The drive back felt endless, and I swore I could still feel that presence in the car, even though I couldn't see anything. When I got home, I went straight to the bathroom. I pulled off my shirt and looked in the mirror. There were marks, deep scratches on my arm and chest, like someone had attacked me. But I knew no one had touched me, except that thing. Since that day, I haven't been back to Driftwood Beach. And the worst part is, even being far away, I still hear the voice sometimes, whispering in my head, like a warning. "You'll come back." The scariest thing is, deep down, I know that somehow, it's true. And when I do, I'm not sure I'll make it out alive next time.
Story 3. Invisible Marks.
My name is Mark, and this story happened about 3 years ago on a beach near a small town in Oregon called Tillamook. I lived in a quiet town nearby, Nehalem, working as an IT technician. Whenever I had free time, I'd go hiking or take pictures of nature. It was my way of disconnecting from the daily grind. But on that day, I decided to try something different. I'd heard stories about Bay Ocean Beach, a secluded spot where hardly anyone goes, especially at night. I figured I'd go around sunset to take some photos. I left my house around 5 p.m. The sun was already setting by the time I reached the beach. You know that weird kind of silence? It was just the wind and the waves, nothing else. No people, no cars. The sky had this strange orange-red glow as it got darker. I started walking along the sand, snapping a few photos, but then I felt something. It's hard to explain. You know when you feel like you're being watched? I looked around and didn't see anything, but that feeling kept growing. I kept walking down the shore, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then I saw something further down, a figure. I thought, oh, someone else is here. But as I got closer, the figure seemed off, like it was far away and right there at the same time. They were standing still, facing the ocean. The way they were just standing there, unmoving, gave me chills. Something about it wasn't right. I called out, "Hey!" but got no response. When I got closer, about 10 feet away, the figure turned around slowly, and that's when I felt my blood run cold. The face, there wasn't one. It was just a blur. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. But somehow I knew it was looking straight at me. I froze. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then the thing started walking toward me. Each step it took on the sand made this dull, soft sound, but there were no footprints, nothing. It was like it wasn't even touching the ground. It kept coming closer, slow but steady. That's when my body finally reacted. I turned and started running, not looking back. What scared me even more was the sound. Even with the wind and the waves crashing, I could still hear the footsteps behind me. Always the same rhythm, never speeding up, never stopping. I glanced over my shoulder and the figure was closer. It didn't make sense. I was running as fast as I could, but it was like it was bending reality, getting closer without rushing. I ran until I hit the base of a sand dune and tried to climb, but the wind was crazy up there. When I reached the top, I looked back, and it wasn't alone anymore. There were more of them, a lot more, rising out of the sand, or maybe the ocean. They were taller than normal people, all with those same featureless faces, walking slowly, like they had all the time in the world. I tumbled down the dune, rolling through the sand, and started sprinting down the road to my car. The wind was in my ears, but now it wasn't just the wind. I swear I heard voices too, whispering, hundreds of them, all saying something at once. But I couldn't understand a word. I just kept running, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I reached my car, shaking so bad I almost dropped the keys. I got inside, slammed the door shut, and turned the engine on, speeding away as fast as I could. But it wasn't over. As I drove down the empty road, the headlights began flickering. They'd dim, then flash bright again. That's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror, there was someone in the back seat, that same faceless figure, just sitting there staring at me. I screamed, swerved the car, nearly crashed into a tree, but when I looked again, there was nothing. Just an empty seat, like nothing had happened. I kept driving, slower now, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what I'd seen. When I finally got home, I rushed inside, locked every door and window, and collapsed on the couch, still shaking. I didn't sleep at all that night. The sounds from the beach, the footsteps, the whispers, they were all stuck in my head. Since that day, I've never gone back to Bay Ocean Beach. And even now, when the wind howls late at night, I get the sense that those figures are still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back for me. I don't know what they were or where they came from, but I'm certain they weren't from this world. And honestly, I hope I never have to see them again.